Is it just me, or does the Marauder class and Juggernaut Ascendancy seem to be so much easier to start with than any other class and Ascendancy combination in the game? Even without a build, the Ascendancy and skill trees gives you so much access to health and defenses, it makes it so much easier to understand how to build your survivability, and being able to survive longer makes it easier to understand the other mechanics of the game. To take it a step further, it also turns out that the Righteous Fire Juggernaut build specifically has an entire website dedicated to it, created by the guy who made the build, Pohx. I hope I'm saying that right. I understand that there are plenty of easy to play, easy to learn builds to try out, and I haven't had nearly enough time to go through them all, but I did take a look at a few of the ones that you all recommended in my last video, and eventually I decided I was going to try out the Righteous Fire Juggernaut. It was the most commented build, and I really wanted to try and make a Marauder work since that was my very first character when I started PoE a year and a half ago. If you want to follow the RF Jug build, you have an entire wiki dedicated to teaching you step by step what to do and when. You have written guides, video guides, a path of building guide that he helps you download. You're told what skills, what supports, what weapons and armor, what passive skill notes to choose, and what stats to look for. You're given a step-by-step play on pretty much everything. The Path of Building tool even has all this broken out by level ranges, so you can follow along as you are leveling. It's pretty insane, and my god do I have a lot of respect for Pohx. This is complete dedication and love for a craft, and I hope he gets the recognition he deserves for putting all of this stuff together, because I personally think that he has created the new player tutorial that every aspiring PoE player should try first. That being said, I didn't follow all of this. I pretty much just used the Path of Building guide and the campaign bandit tips. I didn't really read the equipment section, although I did read what stats I was supposed to look for, and I kinda went on my own for flasks even though eventually I ended up pretty close to what he had. I did follow his guide for everything that I thought was crucial, which was the required skill gems, necessary stats, skill tree, and descendancies. But I've put about 500 or so hours in the game at this point, so I know a bit more than a new player would. Just a bit more. I was still blowing past all the content though. This build made everything before yellow maps a joke. I actually ended up beating the first Searing Exarch Black Star encounter in half the amount of time it took for my last character to even get the quest. To be fair, this was my second character this league. I had a ton of currency left over from my Poisonous Concoction character, as well as some help from a friend on some awesome leveling uniques. But my build and my ability to follow directions isn't exactly what I want to talk about. I wanted to make this video to really push the RF Jug build for new players. Not to say that the Poisonous Concoction build wasn't awesome, but with all this information and support from the guy who created the build, in addition to the fact that the Marauder class and Juggernaut Ascendancy seems to be super new player friendly, this has to be the #1 tutorial build that I think everyone should try first. If you agree with me or just want to take my word for it, that's it. That's the video. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe and all that jazz. But for all of you critical thinkers out there, let me give you 5 main reasons why I think new players should start with a Righteous Fire Juggernaut. Of course, the first reason is that you have the RF Jug wiki there to help you every step of the way. I personally believe that new players should try their very first character without a guide. But once you start diving into the game a bit more and need some help along the way, you have an entire website dedicated to doing that for you. Easy to read guides, YouTube videos, streaming content you can follow along with, a Path of Building guide that acts as your introduction to the third-party tool that everyone uses. A new player can figure out a lot on their own, but having these resources here in case they need them is like a father running alongside a bicycle to make sure their child doesn't fall the first time they ride without training wheels. I don't have too much else to say here, just another big shout out to Pohx for putting all this stuff together. It seems like a lot of you have already seen it since you all told me about it, but if you haven't, definitely check it out. Alright, the second biggest reason is the fact that the passive skill tree and ascendancies are organized in a way that you can heavily stack defenses to contribute to your survivability. Personally, the reason I almost quit on my second character was because of how much and how quickly I was dying. I had no understanding of the game, so when my duelist with about 1200 health was getting one-shot by literally everything, I was pissed off and confused. At that point, if I hadn't told myself that I was going to make a YouTube video out of it, I would have uninstalled the game right then and there. Luckily, I made my second YouTube video, and all of you beautiful viewers were there to give me advice and generally give me an idea of how the game works. I was still adamant that I wasn't going to follow a guide, but your advice kept me playing. The most important thing that you all told me? Build defenses. Constantly upgrade your gear to find the best combination of armor and evasion while maintaining the most health and max resistance stats. The Marauder starts next to all of these health, armor, and resistance nodes, and the Juggernaut Ascendancy is unrivaled in survivability, adding in layers upon layers of health, armor, and life regen. Because of this, you need much less focus on health, armor, and resistances coming from your equipment. Of course, you still need to have them, but you get so much more help from the skill tree. Let's take out the Righteous Fire part of the build for the moment. How easy is it to tell a new player, hey, you can make any build you want, but if you start as a Marauder, any build you make will have the defenses there for you baked into the class, so you can focus on other things while you learn. And if you really want to focus on learning and buff your defenses so you can beat the campaign without any trouble at all, take the Juggernaut Ascendancy, which makes your survivability your main weapon. Whatever damage you can inflict, you can take so much more, which means as long as you start to understand the mechanics of the enemies and bosses around you, you can basically outlast them. It's so much easier to understand the rest of the game if you aren't constantly dying and getting frustrated or discouraged, so I firmly believe that the Marauder class and the Juggernaut Ascendancy is the best tutorial build for new players. So now let's add in the Righteous Fire part of the build back into the mix. Going with the theme that we want this new player to learn as much as they can about the game, what better way to do that than to keep it simple and provide them with a strong single button build setup. For those of you who don't know, the Righteous Fire skill burns enemies around you for a large amount of fire damage. That's the pretty ring of fire you're seeing in all my footage. The catch is that this skill burns the caster as well, meaning that if it's on, you're taking fire damage until you run out of health. So the point of this build is to buff your life regen as much as possible so that you out-heal the burn damage it would cause you. In addition, you have multiple defense skills, multiple auras to buff your defenses and damage, a golem companion who takes unwanted hits for you and provides more life regen, and 2 different movement skills that provide for easy and quick mobility. You only really have 3 damage spells, one being Righteous Fire, and the other is not really being used at all unless you have some beefy monsters in front of you that need a bit more damage to bring them down. The Fire Trap that you can throw at enemies to cause more fire damage in an area, and the Infernal Cry skill, which will burn a bunch of enemies around you and make them explode, which is just satisfying as all hell to see on your screen. That's the build setup in a nutshell. The fact that you can basically run around and kill most enemies brings down the difficulty by a crazy amount. Sometimes you have hundreds of enemies on the screen at once, and as a build with short range, you have to learn which of the enemies hit harder, which cause ailments that can affect your survivability, which ones explode on death. You have to understand and be aware of bleeding effects and shock. You have to learn which flasks to use and remember to keep them up at all times. And these fights last seconds, so you don't have much time to sit there and calculate your next move. You need to have that awareness and be able to act on it within the same moment. So being able to learn how to interact with all these mechanics is a game changer for a new player. The Righteous Fire build says, why don't you focus on staying alive? And if you can stay alive long enough and throw some abilities out at the right time, you can overcome all of this madness. I can't overstate enough how beneficial that is to a new player. I said it in my last video, but when I started playing, I would look at the gameplay of some YouTubers or streamers and be confused as to what I was even looking at. Once you get to maps and beyond, the screen becomes nothing but a blur of pretty colors. So being able to survive longer than 2 seconds if you make a mistake is crucial to a new player's ability to understand what is happening on their screen. It may not be the most fun build as it basically turns into a speedwalking simulator, but it definitely allows you to learn. And that's really what I would look for in a new player tutorial for PoE. On top of the build being relatively easy to use in combat, it's also extremely beneficial in helping a new player understand the mechanics of the game. Just due to the nature of building an extremely tanky character with a passive damage over time playstyle, you know for sure that a new player will learn all the defense stats like health, armor, and life regen. They'll learn the differences in damage types, spells versus attacks, damage over time versus immediate damage. Actually, I'm just going to give you a list of the cool things that I learned following this build. Over the course of building an RF Juggernaut, you will have a chance to learn the differences between burning damage and fire damage, the differences between damaging versus non-damaging ailments, maximizing mana reservation and using health reservation, building loads of defenses, elemental resistances, stacking armor and health and using endurance charges, the mixing of spell damage, fire damage over time, burning damage, and area of effect on your skill tree to maximize the damage you're doing and how big your circle is. There's a lot more, but that's just the stuff that I thought was interesting. It's not that the other guides can't teach you these things, but it's definitely a plus that with the Righteous Fire Juggernaut build, you can learn this while also making the game a bit more approachable. Okay, so this last one is an extremely important one. I haven't really touched on trade too much before, but I'll start the discussion in the context of this video. If you have patience and a bit of luck, you can build RF Jug on solo self-found pretty easily. The build only starts to require uniques after level 83, and you can get by without them until around level 90-ish. Basically, there's no need to trade until very late in the game. I personally look for builds that are easily done without trading or without many unique weapons or armor, and this is specifically because I don't really want to engage with the trading system in PoE. I'm not a fan of how many extra steps there are outside of the game to make a successful sale or purchase. Just the fact that you have to go to a third-party website to trade is not my cup of tea. It sort of rubs me the wrong way and I get really stubborn about stuff like that. PoE trade deserves its own video to talk about, but either way, it's a whole lot to ask a new player to go outside of the game to trade items. Not only do they have to go to a third-party website and pay for a new stash tab, but at the same time, PoE is so complicated that the new player may not even fully understand why they want that item, or what price it should be. They are much more susceptible to being scammed, or just paying way too much for an item they may not need. Which I know some people say is like the experience of trading or whatever, but my point is that it's kind of daunting to ask a new player to go out of their way to try that. And if new players don't want to engage with the trading system, then sometimes following a build that asks for a very specific item or a very specific unique will add in a whole new facet to the game. That player may just burn out on trying to get that one unique to drop with the right stats so that they can continue on with their progression. So I think that it's a plus that the RF Jug is a pretty SSF friendly build. There are 3 uniques recommended on the build guide, and they don't become recommended until you get to around level 90 or so, which at that point, a new player can make a choice to either trade, find another way to make up those stats, or wait for the right drop to happen now that you're killing enemies in mass amounts just by walking over them. I'm sure there are more benefits to using this build as a new player tutorial, but I won't take up any more of your time for now. Before I end this video though, I do want to mention one negative about RF Jug. I sort of mentioned it before, but obviously this build is circled around passive gameplay. Just walk forward and try not to die too fast and enemies around you will die first. I liked the build, and I thought it was fun to try out once. I got to experience so much more of the game in about half the time I spent on any other character because I was overpowering most content and I almost could not be killed. But I will say, in my opinion, passive gameplay makes me feel a bit like I have training wheels on. It's fun to watch things drop dead around me, but I almost feel like I've entered the easy mode PoE instead of the normal one. I mean, easy in comparison, not actually easy. I haven't gotten to the true endgame yet where things are actually hard. I'm pretty sure that just means that I've started to understand the game enough where I can continue learning with builds and gameplay that I personally enjoy and don't need to stick with the training wheels that RF Jug gives me. But this video is not about me. Just because I've spent 500 hours in PoE to get to this point doesn't mean all new players will. So my statement stands. If you are a new player and want to learn as much as possible about how to play Path of Exile, if you want to access the hidden true tutorial, choose the Marauder class, the Juggernaut Ascendancy, and follow the RF Jug build by Pohx. But most importantly, I hope you enjoyed the video. Leave a like if you liked it and subscribe for more content. I hope you enjoy your Ring of Fire adventures, and I can't wait to see what we talk about next.